Have you wondered if your child might have an auditory processing delay? Weak auditory processing is one of the most difficult to spot, and yet in our experience, one of the most common factors in learning difficulties. We have had some incredible guests on LD Expert Live to talk about this topic, and today they're going to help you explore auditory processing from the perspective of the student in the classroom, the parent searching for answers, and the experts who researched and developed the solutions. You'll learn what auditory processing therapy looks like and why it works. This is LD Expert Live. Welcome to LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning differences, dyslexia, and attention challenges. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers and author of At Wit's End, A Parent's Guide to Ending the Struggle, Tears, and Turmoil of Learning Disabilities. This book will help you understand why some bright children and teens struggle in school and what can be done to change that permanently. To get a free copy, go to parentsatwitsend.com. Let's say hello to Lauren, our moderator and the Director of Clinical Growth and Operations at Stowell Learning Centers. Good morning, Lauren.
Hello. Hello to everyone who is out there. Let us know that you're here and where you're checking in from. We see an early bird here with Karen. Hello. Good morning from Sacramento, she says. So let us know that you're here watching this very important show. This is a really important topic in understanding your child's learning or attention challenges. We're going to take questions at the end because this is such a jam-packed show, but start posting your questions now so we make sure we get to everyone. So go ahead and post away.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. If you're just joining us, this is LD Expert Live. I'm your host, Jill Stowell, and today we're talking all about auditory processing. Auditory processing challenges are so invisible that children and adults struggling with them are often misunderstood or misdiagnosed. If you are exhausted at the end of every meeting, auditory processing could be the reason. If your child uses a harsh or too loud voice, it could be auditory processing. The person who always seems a little lost or behind the conversation may have auditory challenges. I'm going to show you a video clip from my interview with Adalyn Smith, a high school student with auditory processing disorder, about what it's like to live with APD all day, every day. Auditory processing is the root of so many different learning, attention, or social difficulties, but it is kind of hidden. So yes. A lot of times in a classroom, a teacher is going to look and think that the student has ADHD because they look like they're not listening and they're not paying attention. But that could be a direct symptom of APD.
Yeah, it could just be them being exhausted from listening so hard that they just completely tune out and say, I don't even care anymore. I'm too exhausted for this. I'm going to tune out and do something else.
Right.
Which really is APD, and it's not ADHD at all.
Right. And so this is really something that the world needs to know about, because unless you experience it or you deal with it all the time, the way we do at the learning centers, it's just not obvious.
No.
I have to say, I love that you talk to, people who are becoming audiologists, because these are the people that are testing for it.
Exactly.
But it gives them a picture of what it looks like on the other side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been following your Instagram, Adalyn, and you share such good insights and advice. And so to our viewers, I would really encourage you to follow Adalyn on Instagram at Advocate for APD. And if you have teens with auditory issues, I encourage you to have them follow her. She touches on things that they're dealing with that people just don't understand unless they're living with it. And, as you said, it's nice to know that you're not alone.
Yes, for sure. I was talking when I spoke at the University of Maryland, they told me beforehand that they learn APD from books and textbooks in their research, but living with it is a completely different thing. Yes, you hear about the exhaustion, but like living with it is just, it's so different.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit. What is it like to be a student with APD? How do you feel like it's different for you than other students?
Yeah, you definitely, you feel kind of different because so when you grow up, right, your parents tell you all the time, you can do anything, you can be anything, go out in the world, take all those opportunities, grab onto everything you possibly can. And that's what I did. I tried everything I could, lots of different things. And then when I got my diagnosis, it was like an automatic, like, oh, like I have limitations. I have things I cannot do physically. And I have these things that I have to overcome in order to keep going on with my life and succeed. I remember just being, as soon as I heard that and I got diagnosed, I was almost like shut down in a way because it was like I was a stereotype, and I was like, I was immediately put into the statistic of being slow and a slow learner and dumb and stupid and not trying hard enough. All these negative things were like poured on me. And, once you hear those things, I mean, like, who wants to come back up to the top, right? It's hard to get back up there. And you feel slow, and it's a hard road.
So learning about the diagnosis, because you've really studied this.
Yes.
That seems like it's really helped you to understand it better, understand yourself.
Yeah.
And so in class, it's going to be a lot more difficult to listen to a lecture and get it all. What do you do?
Yeah, it's definitely a very hard challenge. There's lots of challenges in the classroom. For example, one is lectures. When I'm in the classroom, I'm listening to a lecture, it's hard for me to listen to a fact and then process that in my brain and then write it down. What makes it even harder is when I have to, listen to the fact and then I go down. And one thing I really rely on is lip reading. So when I go down to take my note, I can't see the professor's lips anymore. So that is one communication blocker for me. So whenever how do I say this right? So like the flow doesn't work correctly because I have to take the notes and then I keep going back up and down and it gets messed up and I can't process everything. And there's side conversations going on and it gets into a lot. So that's one challenge I have.
And then your notes when you get home are probably not going to be accurate because there are holes there. You're going to have to connect the dots kind of.
I mean, everyone else's notes was always organized and mine was like random fact there, random note there. And just like, it's so unorganized and they're kind of everywhere. And so when you get home, you're like, wait, what did I learn in class again? Like, I don't know how to solve this math equation because I was so focused on listening to the teacher and just trying so hard to get that information in.
So you said some really important things there. Just the fact that, first of all, you said your notes were really disorganized. And so, as a parent or a teacher, we could easily look at that and say, oh, well, she's not organized. She needs to learn how to take notes, which, you definitely want to have that skill. But that may not be the root of the problem. It may not be a lack of organization. It may be that you're not getting all the information, so you can't organize it because it doesn't make enough sense.
Yeah, I remember I had some tutor in elementary school where she would take me out of class and we would just work on note taking. And I hated that because then I missed more information in the class and then I had to go back after and I was like, can we not do this in class? Like I need to get the information in class and do note taking later. So that was difficult as well. Another challenge I have is working in groups because, you get to your group and literally everyone is talking. There are so many conversations going on at the same time that I can't hear anything. And so when I was in elementary school, I remember taking charge and saying, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. This person's going to do this. And then we're all going to come together. And they took that as controlling. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean to come across controlling. I can't hear anything. And I got so much anxiety in me and so much stress that I felt like I had to take control. Otherwise, nothing was going to get done. And then we would look like a bad presentation group.
Wow. Such amazing insights.
Thank you.
You know, you mentioned the fact that you're working so hard in class to block the noise, to focus in, to get all the information, that you're just exhausted. So then when you get home, you know, and you have to do homework, what is that like at that point?
Yeah, I remember so many afternoons coming home and just being like, my brain was complete mush. Like, there was nothing I could do to get it back up to where it wasn't mush anymore. I would come home and I would just like take a 2-hour nap because I couldn't handle doing anything else. And I just needed a break from constant stimulus coming into my life and my ears. And it was too much. So I just said to myself, I need a break right now. And I can't be successful in any other task right now. So I need to take a break and take some time to just be in complete quietness. And that helped a lot.
Which is a huge thing to understand about yourself. I mean, that's amazing. It's hard, you know, as a parent at first, if you don't realize what's going on with your child. And then it's like, okay, what is going on? Are they avoiding homework? Are they just lazy? Again, you know, I just so appreciate the insights that you're giving us.
Thank you.
And I want to say this thing about the exhaustion, that is really important. I mean, the fact that listening is so exhausting for individuals with auditory processing difficulties. Most of you watching have probably been in a situation where you were trying to have a conversation with someone pre-COVID in a crowded or very noisy restaurant. It's really hard. You probably missed a lot of information. Maybe you acted like you knew what was going on at times when you didn't. And when you left the restaurant, you were probably exhausted. You may even have decided to leave early. So now imagine having to put that kind of effort into listening at school all day long. If you have a child who falls apart or just wants to sleep when they get home, they're probably mentally exhausted. Adalyn is an amazing young woman. She is really passionate about helping others with APD to better understand themselves and how to make life easier. So I encourage you to follow her on Instagram at advocate for APD. I have learned really a lot from reading her posts, just, you know, kind of getting the feel from someone who's really living it every day, what it's like. Adalyn is currently doing auditory training with us at Stowell Learning Centers and is chronicling her experiences on Instagram, so take a look. As a parent, especially a mom, you are usually the first to know that your child is struggling. But what's really going on and what to do about it is a whole other issue. Our next video clip is with Lita Hsia, a parent who is now on the other side of that journey. Lita was trained as an occupational therapist and was very proactive about getting her daughter, Sophie, help early on. But then there was this recommendation to dismiss Sophie from speech therapy, and she just knew that she had to keep searching because she knew the job wasn't done. In this clip, Lita shares from a parent's perspective about their journey with auditory stimulation and training at Stowell Learning Center and the overall impact that it had.
So I want to say to the parents who, you know, your children are smart, but they can't show you how smart they are. And Jill, you and I are talking about that bell curve, you know, above average intelligence, as smart, but there's a disconnect between what they can show you, whether it's through academics, and what you know intuitively as parents that the child can do. So it was both a relief and just comforting to know someone understands my child, and what's more, here is the roadmap, and here is the time that it would take. I remember you guys took me through phase 1, which would look like this. Phase 2 would look like this. And I think because Sophie was so fatigued after phase 1, we did take a break, and then we made the most of the summers. We had the intensive for her, and it just, each summer, I think we did 2 summers, just put her in a strong position for the following grade, if that makes sense.
Yes. And I know one of the things that, as we talked about what was happening with Sophie, we kind of looked at it on a continuum of learning, a learning skills continuum, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more because I want everyone to understand it. But we talked about auditory processing and auditory processing training, and I think that was actually kind of a new idea for you.
Yes.
You hadn't heard about that before.
Yes. Yeah. Which made, I mean, after you guys recommended it, of course, I did a little bit of my research, and of course, it's is it Dr. Alfred Tomatoes that says that the brain cannot reproduce what it cannot hear.
Right.
So for Sophie, that made total sense. The nasal sounds, the garbled articulation, and no amount of me trying to sound out the words. She was trying so hard. And so when, with the sound therapy, that was the first thing you guys said, sound therapy is required for all of the students. I mean, we just, whatever you suggested, we trusted the process. These guys have been at it for so long. I'm a novice, so I'm just going to do everything as I'm told. And so the sound therapy, requires for her. We did that 7 days a week, and she's listening to this beautiful engineered, and it's classical music, and it made total sense because it really, like we were talking about the primitive reflexes, I could see that the sound therapy was really hitting the foundation, taking her through all of the frequencies that I knew she couldn't hear. And I had forgotten to say, now I understand the higher frequencies, it's a, hey, pay attention.
Right.
I was wondering why she was so like a wilting flower, like a couch potato, and just very low energy. Of course, I understood the fatigue now because at school, it took so much of her energy just to understand sophisticated 4th grade chatter. And then she was out of a cultural context because she didn't grow up here.
Right.
It was exhausting. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Therapy, and the auditory stimulation training. So sound therapy, and then it was the training for the reading and the comprehension, the sound codes, getting the sound and the symbol, and connecting them all. So I saw, we probably, when the sound therapy started, we didn't see anything for maybe 4 months, but I remember it was somehow in the 4 to 6 months, and please, parents, don't take my word as in, but Lita said different. But I remember we were sitting around the dinner table, and usually conversations, and it's after school, it's dinner time, she's exhausted, would go above her head.
Mm-hmm.
This time around, I still remember the day one of us had cracked a joke. So she looks up, she makes a response. It's like timing was impeccable. And then she was able to make, a counter joke. And we all went, Wow.
You know, and I think those things are amazing. That's what we're actually after, is real functional changes, you know, that are going to impact their life. Let's talk a little bit about the learning skills continuum. For any of you who are new in joining us, I just want to make sure that you're in the loop here, because this is really important. We think of learning like a continuum, with academic, school, and social skills at the top. We're all very aware of those skills, right? But when a child is struggling with speech or reading, writing, math, or even socially, people don't realize that there are many, many supporting skills that need to be in place in order to learn and function as effectively as possible. From the bottom up, starting with core learning skills in the green, we have developmental visual and motor skills, including integration and proper functioning of primitive reflexes, which Lita mentioned a little bit when she was talking about Sophie. Core learning skills have a huge impact on physical and mental organization and regulation. The processing skills level in blue involves cognitive skills like memory, attention, processing speed, and auditory and visual processing. Now, auditory and visual processing are not your hearing and seeing, but how the brain perceives and thinks about information that comes in through the ears and the eyes. Executive function skills, the purple level, are high-level self-management skills, including reasoning and planning. There are many different skills at each of these levels. Weaknesses or inefficiencies in any of these underlying supporting skills can make learning more difficult than it needs to be and will stress the attention system. So when Lauren was talking about our functional academic and learning skills assessment, we are really looking not only at the academic pieces, reading, writing, spelling, math, whatever areas are impacted academically, but we're looking at those underlying skills to see where is it breaking down and what is getting in the way of that student being able to learn as comfortably and effectively as they could be at the top of that continuum. So, Lita, I know the learning continuum really resonated with you. I would love for you to just talk about that a little bit, both from the standpoint of a parent and as an occupational therapist.
Right. So I think, so my training, probably Jill, my training took me as far as the first rung, which is those core learning, which is what I worked on with Sophie. But I didn't know after that, when she reached school age, what am I going to do with all the rest of it, other than speech and language and all of the rest. So so in my mind, do I focus on handwriting? Do I focus on this? Do I focus on that? So when you presented the learning skills continuum, it was like my lights went on. That makes total sense. If your foundations are not solid, how will you ever build all of the rest of the skills? And so that's why I knew tutors. I love tutors. I had tutor for chemistry and physics when I was growing up in high school, but I just knew it wasn't the right answer for her because it wasn't foundational enough. The skills at the lower. So Sophie with the processing skills, some of the executive function, but that certainly that auditory training piece was a huge key. Could I just back up, because I know parents would want to be looking at more of the life skills. Is this auditory training going to have? Does it spill over into real life? So I explained to you about what happened around our dinner table. But as an OT, I could have trained her handwriting. It was chicken scratch. And it was the bane of my life were those Venn diagrams, Jill, where I was ready to pull my hair out. she tried so hard to get it. But again, I did not do any handwriting training. I didn't even touch it because there were so many bigger issues. But I can tell you, it was through the sound therapy again, the handwriting came to be, the how much pressure, how much, the smoothness of her writing. And she does calligraphy now. And I mean, her
Wow.
writing is prettier than mine. Certainly. And again, with the pieces coming together for her, and I'll just end with this story. It was around a year into the Stowell training, and as parents, me in particular, by nature, I'm a nurturer, and I saw her as one that needed protecting. And I can only say, parents, please do not follow my example, because it was actually Sophie who taught me. She said, Mom, there's a play and I really I'm thinking lines. She's going to do lines and how she, get the cue. But her words really resonated. She said, Mom, I can do this. Let me try. So there was silence, and I had to learn, she doesn't need protecting. She is strong. She's capable. This is temporary, and I knew it was temporary. And she's getting the support and the training that she needs. And so my response was, you got it. You try. Let me know how I can support you. And Jules, she never looked for me once. She just went around the house with that script. Whenever she was done with the homework, she'd go back to it. And I mean, I have it on DVD, but she did great. She didn't. And I think there was only one line that she missed, but she faked it till she made it.
Perfect. It is pretty amazing. And I've talked about this in another broadcast that we did on auditory processing, but it's pretty amazing how the auditory and visual systems are connected in with the body. The auditory system is connected into the attention center, the emotional language learning centers in the brain, but it's also connected throughout the entire body. And so truly, the use of sound can help someone to ground. It can help them to energize. It can improve coordination. It connects so many things, and it certainly supports all of the work that we do, whether it's at core learning skills or processing or executive function. It's helping to make connections. And then, of course, the vestibular system, our system of balance and kind of our relationship to gravity, is housed in the inner ear also. So you can use sound then to support handwriting. We've had kids that just they start listening and their handwriting changes, and you think, how can that be? But the way that we are connected, sound really has an incredible impact. I want to just talk a little bit. We've touched on the auditory training a number of times. I want to just pull this together a little bit. That was the root of the challenge for Sophie, and it showed up in speech and comprehension, and even, as you said, her energy, and auditory processing was really the root of those challenges. And so, of course, an important piece of her program at the Learning Center was what we call auditory stimulation and training, with an emphasis in comprehension. So we prescribed a sound therapy program for Sophie to do at home. She happened to have done the Simonis program. She listened each day to beautifully recorded and acoustically engineered music that stimulates the auditory system to tune in and pay attention to this wide range of frequencies in sound, which we really need to have to be grounded, to be energized, and to process all of the speech sounds and to get, the detail in intonation, and to be able to pick up mood in someone's voice, and to get all of that fine discrimination that we need to get a clear, complete message. So that was done in passive listening. She was doing it at home as a home listening program. And then she also in the center did audio vocal training lessons to get all of those frequencies in sound that her brain was learning to process into her voice. So she was wearing headphones, the clinician was wearing headphones, and they had a microphone, and they were really training now her voice to be able to hold and all of those frequencies. When the voice is rich with a wide range of frequencies, especially high frequencies, it becomes the ongoing stimulus for the auditory system. So it continually feeds your own system. So, Lita, you've talked quite a bit about some of the changes that you saw with Sophie, with the auditory stimulation and training. How did you feel about it when it was first introduced? And is there anything else that you want to share about that?
Sure. So I think you asked me when it was introduced. Again, for me, it was important, and for my husband and I to be on the same page. We are not sprinters. We look for the long-term goal. When talking to you, Jill, I met Lauren, and I just had a great feel about the center and the clinicians that were working with Sophie. Sophie went through a stage where she was going through a cultural change, but the kids were not kind at school. And so, she saw that the clinicians, and they were her peeps. It was her place of feeling loved, accepted, and that was important as a parent. Would the clinicians be kind to her? But so for me, the long term was really important. Trust the process, and it's just a part of their journey. I can only tell you now. So Sophie's now 17, Jill. She just got her driving permit and she's driving around. But what killed me at the beginning was I knew my smart child was coming out with things like, why am I so slow? Why am I so stupid? And I would ask, how did you get that message? Did someone? No, it's just that I'm here with you and I spend long hours and look at those kids outside, they're playing. And so when I found you guys and you took me through the process and I started seeing results, so that, there are, you and I spoke about this, Jill. During the 4th month, 6th month, I saw that trajectory, but then there were times when it would just plateau. I didn't see anything, but again, if I could just drill the message home that there is hope, there is solutions, because if there is a problem, there definitely is a root. And trusting the process for us looked like Paul and I would have, I can't see changes, but then all of a sudden we would say that, and then boom.
Right.
And I know that, I have this face, but I can tell you I am not a tiger mom. I am that mother who says, you've done enough, go and play outside, go on your skateboard, or they need to move, because I understand the brain. Our children need to move, especially with COVID, fresh air. And so for those who are interested academically, because we were not thinking we would say to Sophie, if you've given it your best, then a best C+ is better than an A, easy A+. But I can tell you around middle school, she was like around that 3.0 grade point average. Jill and Lauren, this year she's pulling in 4.0.
Wow.
Now, see, the difference is she works hard because she's motivated, she chooses to work hard. It's not because she has to.
So what we're doing at the learning centers is different than typical tutoring or therapies because it is comprehensively addressing the various specific areas of weakness for each individual student. We just must get to the root of the problem if the student is going to have the opportunity to thrive as a learner and really work to their potential. I know our kids are smart and creative enough to find ways to work around their challenges, but as you heard from Adalyn and Lita, it's not comfortable to do that, and it's not necessary or fair. Over the last 35 years, I have been fortunate to get to learn from experts all over the world in the fields of neuroscience, attention, learning, and auditory processing. Our next two clips are from two of the top experts in the field of auditory training, Alex Doman and Paul Madaule. Alex is a best-selling author and speaker and the founder of Vital Neuro, Advanced Brain Technologies, and Sleep Genius. He's going to give you a little bit of the why behind the listening program, one of the key sound therapy programs that we use in our centers. Let's talk about the listening program a little bit as a therapeutic tool.
Where would you like to start, Jill? Because I think there's so many points that we can touch on. But maybe let's kick off with some fundamentals.
Okay.
And let's talk a bit about sound frequency in the brain as a foundation. So, we as human beings can process a range of sounds that are measured in what are called frequencies. And high frequencies are very high tones or high pitch. Low frequencies are low tone or low pitch. And that's a range from 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. So a really broad spectrum of sound that we take in and process as human beings. And different sound frequencies affect our function and behavior in different ways. So just as music tempo entrains the brain, so does sound frequency. So if we want to help calm a nervous system, ground an individual, help to integrate the lower brain areas, we'll use generally slower tempoed music with lower beats per minute, and we'll use lower sound frequencies that are very grounding to the individual. And we would call that in the listening program the green zone. So the listening program music is actually color coded. And then in the orange zone, these would be mid-tempo frequencies or mid frequency tones and moderate tempos. And that orange zone relates to attention, to focus, to communication, and to learning. And then the higher frequencies with faster tempos, which is the red zone, is more frontal executive functions. So it's spatial orientation, it's planning, it's creativity, it's working memory skills. So what actually happens is different sound frequencies train different brain regions related to those functions. And that's one of the fascinating things about music, is that we can dial in different brain regions with different sound frequency. Now, the truth is we can benefit from training the entire brain, and that's what's done with the listening program. So in the protocols, we'll go through a progression of what we call the blue zone music, which is full spectrum music across the sound frequencies, which gently trains all of the brain centers that are receiving that music. It lays a foundation to build the house upon of listening. And then we'll train the green zone and get that sensory motor foundation strong and our stress resilience strong. Then we'll build to communication skills, then higher order thinking, then we'll down train. And you may have picked up a theme that the sound frequency progression in the listening program follows the model of human child development. So the same way the brain develops, the music follows that first progression, because as a young child first becomes physically efficient. And then once we have that physical efficiency, we begin to develop receptive and expressive language and communication skills. And once we have communication happening, higher order thinking begins to happen with more complexity. So we go from the brainstem to the midbrain up to the cortex and then train back down. So we're actually able to get a whole brain training over time. And all we need to do the program is have a pair of approved headphones, have an online subscription or an iPod with a personalized playlist, and then to work with a provider, just as you have providers at Stowell Learning Centers that take you through the progression of the training that's right for you. So there are different protocols, and then based on what an individual's goals are and where their current level of brain performance is, a program will be selected that's the right match for them today. Then they'll follow that progression and can lead to other programs over time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has been an incredible tool for us and for our students. The impact of therapeutic listening or sound therapy has been absolutely profound for our students. We almost always use it in conjunction with other programming, but it facilitates everything we do because music can just get into the brain in a way that we can't get any other way. I remember thinking about the green zone. I was remembering a brilliant little boy whose behavior was so out of control that his parents couldn't take him anywhere. And he started doing the TLP Spectrum program because we really wanted to get that grounding and settling going for him. And his parents saw an immediate settling in his behavior. So his program, as you know, is 5 days listening and 2 days off. And his parents called at the end of the first week begging for him to be able to listen over the weekend as well, because they'd seen such a profound change.
As parents, when we begin to see our children respond to something, we want to do more, right? And we don't want to risk losing that change that's happening. And as you've learned in your 21 years of practice with the listening program, Jill, we know the brain needs periods for integration. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting in many of the research studies on the listening program, and there's a large body of independent research on outcomes with TLP, that we measure the most change not during the period of intervention, but actually when we've stopped and given the brain a break for a period of time, the brain consolidates and integrates those changes. And that's where we tend to see the greatest outcomes. Mm-hmm. So, what we're seeing while we're doing it's wonderful. The good news is what's ahead is generally even better.
Right. As the neuroplasticity of the brain allows it to change, and then for a period of time afterwards, it's almost, to me, it's almost like it's just settling in and getting really solid there.
Well, as we know, we're teaching the brain, and it's learning, and it's developing new skills and new abilities. And really what we're doing with the listening program is giving the brain exercise. And we're exercising it in processing sound frequency, in volume changes, in spatial orientation to our environment. So there are many aspects of the auditory system that are being trained. Mm-hmm. And often people say, well, how does sound link to movement? How does it link to communication? How does it link to thinking? And one of the interesting things is that when you map a brain with functional imaging that is listening to music, it touches almost all brain regions, from the subcortical areas to the cortical areas, as we mentioned. Sensory integration, sensory motor function, language communication and attention, and higher order thinking skills are all touched when we listen to music. Mm-hmm. And music can be used to, change our neurochemistry, right? To boost dopamine or serotonin, to give us those feel-good hormones that allow us and motivate us to do things and to keep coming back to them. And it's one of the, I think, reasons we see such high compliance with the listening program is that it feels good to put on the headphones and experience the music. And we're intrinsically motivated to get that feeling again. The brain has a drive to come back to it. And that drive to come back to it allows us to continue and sustain these programs that, as you know, we generally do over a course of several months.
Right, right. You know, I have to, you mentioned auditory processing in there, and I just have to mention auditory processing because it's a big piece of what we do. We get so many students with difficulty with articulation or reading or language, and those things tend to have an auditory base. And I was thinking about how the music training the auditory system allows it to process information that it wasn't really tuning into before. We had an 11-year-old who couldn't pronounce certain sounds in his speech, even after years of speech therapy. And within 3 weeks of starting his listening program, he was able to pronounce all of his sounds in connected speech because the brain was now, in a sense, being able to hear it where it couldn't before.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point, Jill, right? Because we can only reproduce the sounds that the brain can process, right? So if we're not understanding the messages coming in, it's hard to express in response to these messages. So if we have disordered auditory processing, the brain isn't understanding what it's hearing clearly. And language, phonemes are made up of sound frequencies. And music is made up of sound frequencies. So it is a way to train the brain how to process language sounds. So we frequently see these improvements in reading comprehension and reading fluency, in receptive language, in expressive language skills. So, especially when we get into the orange zone, when we're training those frequencies in speech and language, we're touching Wernicke's and Broca's areas in the brain for receptive and expressive language, and reinforcing the brain's ability to understand these sounds. And the way the brain learns is practice. And what we're doing with the listening program is we're giving the brain practice in auditory processing, but rather than using language as the input, music's the input. And again, the brain feels good when it gets that music training and wants to keep coming back to it.
Yep. And, I mentioned earlier that this is Dyslexia Awareness Month, and the therapeutic listening has been really critical for our dyslexic students in that area that you're talking about being able to perceive and reproduce the sounds in words, as well as it's been really good from that regulating, orienting standpoint for really supporting visual orientation on the page. Sound therapy is part of virtually every one of our students' cognitive learning plan because it supports processing and skill development at every level of the learning skills continuum. When students are doing auditory stimulation and training, they are also doing specific audio-vocal training lessons in their sessions. This active listening training helps the voice acquire the sound frequencies that the brain is learning to hear, so that the person's own voice becomes an ongoing stimulus for their auditory system. This is an essential element to making and keeping the changes in speaking, listening, attention, comprehension, and reading. So in our final clip, Paul Madaule explains why. Paul is truly a pioneer in the field of listening training. He is the founder of the Listening Center in Toronto, Canada, and was himself a student of Dr. Alfred Tomatis, the original researcher and developer of sound therapy.
When you start improving something, you have to find a way to keep reinforcing it, reinforcing the improvement. And the beauty of the way we are made up is that we have a system which permit to stimulate, develop, reinforce our listening. What is this system? Well, this system is our voice. It's like learning a language. The more I speak it, the more I listen to. I start listening to it, then I continue speak it, then I reinforce, and the loop, the circle get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's the way you improve listening, which means that there is a second phase in the work we do, which is extremely important, and that many people in auditory training kind of forget because it's a little bit more complicated than just listening to music, is the voice work. You have a microphone and you hear in real time your voice modified through the device which modifies the music. Well, and transmit your voice to this system of push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, in order to develop your self-listening. And this self-listening is going to be is going to ensure the long-term effect of the program. As a clinician, what interests me is not just a change. A pill can change you, but as soon as you stop taking the pill, you're back to where you were. I want the change to maintain. The beauty is that we have a system which is our voice when we speak, or voice when we read, which permit to maintain, reinforce, and permit you little by little to get out or to get less tributary, to less enslaved by your learning disability. That is what I've done. I have to say, my treatment with stomatis, my therapy at the time, my training took about a summertime plus perhaps 1 year of reinforcement. But very early on, Tomatis told me, if you want to really move on, and do whatever you want, you have to work on your voice. And the way Tomatis was suggesting, and I still do that, to work on the voice is reading out loud. The work we do during the active phase of the program is to make this reading fun. And then following the program, that is what I call the neuroplastic aspect of our work, is to continue to read out loud, which is an exercise that I recommend people who have done this program, or to the parents to children who have not done this program. There is always a possibility to read out loud, and in order to make it more, to make it stronger, to make it more effective, to make it more working more on the ear, you put your right hand as if it was a microphone in front of your mouth, like if you wanted to boomerang the information from your hand to your ear, from your right hand to your right ear. Why the right ear? Because it is the ear connected more specifically with the language center of the brain, which means that you are creating a stronger link between the voice, the ear, the brain, the voice, the ear, the brain, and you improve listening, and as a result, reading, and as a result, all those mechanisms underlying the learning process. I assure you, it works. The only time it doesn't work is when children are forced to do it. They hate reading, and if you take the approach of making it a task, a job, an exercise, you kill its effectiveness. It has to be done in the beginning, like talking, with moving your hand in front of your mouth, like Italians do and French do. And you have to find fun ways to do it. But it's really a fantastic exercise. It helped me not only with English, but with French, but with English, and later in life with Spanish. I learned so much by putting my words into my mouth, into my ear, into my brain. This is the best exercise I can recommend people to do. If the voice is not good, if the child, try to really work on the quality of the voice. In fact, you better deal with a voice teacher than with someone interested in it's a voice, it's a quality of the projection of the voice. Putting the right hand in front of the mouth automatically pull the sound out of the mouth. It makes the sound come out of the mouth easier, and the more the sound comes out of the mouth, produced through the lips, through the front part of the mouth, the more defined, clear, rich in color and timbre it's going to be, the more stimulating it's going to be for the ear and for the brain.
Wow, you just said so many amazing things in there. You know, when you said that if the child, it kind of has a flat voice and they're kind of mumbling. One of the things that we do sometimes with kids is to have them create a comparison. And it's really fun and funny to do for them, as opposed to having them have to repeat something over and over because they need to do it better. Sometimes we'll take like a paragraph and we'll say, okay, we're going to read this just like a robot. And so they have to read it as boring as they can. And then we say, okay, now let's do it like an announcer, like we're really awesome. And by giving them that contrast, they start to be able to play with their voice and have fun. And I encourage everybody to try this hand mic. This is really interesting. When you put your right hand up there, it does then amplify that voice to your right ear. This is LD Expert Live. I'm Jill Stowell, founder of Stowell Learning Centers, and I just want to give a huge shout out to these incredible guests, Adalyn Smith, Lita Hsia, Alex Doman, and Paul Madaule. I hope you've been posting your questions because we are going to the chat right now.
Hello. Yes, a lot of engagement, a lot of questions. So here we go. We're going to try to get through all of them. I'll group them by commenter, since there's a few people who've posted several questions. So we want to get to them all. So Deanna is saying, I'm learning so much and putting the connections together for my 11-year-old boy who is exceptionally gifted with what I believe is APD. How can your team support kids who live in NorCal?
Well, we found that we can work remotely. We were doing that for many years with a lot of aid from parents. And with the pandemic, we found that we had to do that. And so we're able to work with kids from all over the world remotely.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And we talked about the listening program with advanced brain technologies. That's a part of it, you know, that is a home component. Sometimes we also send you or help you order some special equipment that the child wears during session to really amplify those sounds through their own voice, through the computer. So we've found ways, and it's still highly effective. And actually, Adalyn herself is in Utah. So, and she's doing training with us remotely and seeing phenomenal changes. So Deanna has a follow-up question. What is the research on whether this sound therapy works as well for older children as it does for younger ones?
I will tell you from our experience, Alex Doman mentioned that there are many different studies, and those are posted on their website, advancedbrain.com. From our experience, and we work with children as young as 4 and go all the way through adult, we have seen changes with every age. Truly, we see changes with sound therapy with every age.
Mm-hmm. And then YouTube viewer Papa Bear, this is such an eye-opener. We have been trying to get my daughter because she's behind in school, or trying to help my daughter because she's behind in school. She is always exhausted at school. She has a hard time understanding verbal instructions. He continues, everything being said is hitting the nail on the head with all of her signs and symptoms. Mm-hmm. So he really resonated with kind of what Adalyn was saying about just being fatigued and exhausted and having a hard time keeping up in lectures at school. Does learning a second language create issues with APD or auditory processing issues?
That is not something that I have really dug into, but I think the real question goes the opposite direction, is do auditory processing issues impact learning one or multiple languages? And we have seen that when we have children who are bilingual, they have parents who speak, they may have one parent that speaks one language and one that speaks another in the home to help develop that bilingualness. And that's a very effective way to do it. But what they find is that the child actually has the same issues in both languages.
Mm-hmm.
When there's an auditory issue at the root of that.
Right. We have Lisette. As I talk to my son, 16, about starting sound therapy, how long does it take for him to see a difference? I think it's overwhelming not knowing how long he'll have to do it.
Mm-hmm. It varies student to student. It's very interesting because often the more severe the challenges are, the sooner we sometimes see changes. And the more subtle they are, sometimes it feels like it takes a little bit longer to see the changes because the person has so many tools for compensating. So it really does vary student to student. I'm gonna tell you, when my son was a teenager, I wanted him to do sound therapy. And I just decided that I was going to pay him to do it. I just said, I want to know how this works for you. I'm just going to, you're going to get to earn for every sound therapy session you do, as long as you'll give me feedback. And when it turned out to be an arrangement that was sort of, helpful to me and helpful to him, he was really happy to do it. And he was 14 at the time, and I saw changes in 3 days. And even though I'm a practitioner and I'd been using it for a long time, I said what many parents say, well, it couldn't be the listening. And the consultant I was working with said, well, of course it's the listening. So it varies person to person, but get him going. Once my son got going with it, he was really happy to continue doing it because he saw the change himself.
Mm-hmm. And we see that with our students, that it's not necessarily, an invasive process. I mean, it's listening. It's usually 15 minutes twice a day. They put on the headphones, they do something else, a quiet activity. And so before long, it becomes part of their routine. And kids a lot of times feel like they're not complete, or they've missed something in their day if they forget to listen. So that usually does happen with students. So,
and one of the things that's really nice about it is, if you think about how exhausted these kids are when they get home from school, and then they put their listening on and they get 15 minutes to draw or do Legos or just something, really chill that they like while they listen. It's really very positive and refreshing.
Mm-hmm. We have Beck commenting, my son with inattentive ADHD is fine in the classroom. His issues are primarily with homework or non-preferred tasks. He cannot recall more than one directed task and will not help himself to do more. So that definitely can have an auditory component, that may be affecting memory, but also, it might have a memory component truly of just being able to recall information, sequencing, internal organization, kind of bleeding up into more of processing, higher level comprehension and executive function skills. We see that a lot. Let's see. And then we have Dawn here, who has, I want to make sure I find them all. She has quite a few questions. Let's see. So her first is, if auditory processing is stimulated by high vocal sounds, why don't all men have auditory processing difficulties? In this case as well, would diagnosis like a diagnosis like cerebral palsy result in higher incidences of auditory processing issues because some sounds aren't clear when you speak?
So interestingly, when you think about someone's voice, sounds have what are called overtones. So even in a male voice, which is lower and carries more low frequency, there still are overtones or higher frequencies in that voice. And when you listen to someone who has a really crisp, clear voice, energized voice, and you're just like, wow, I really want to listen to them. Well, that is probably because they've got those overtones, in their voice. And so that can be trained, into any voice. It doesn't just have to be a female voice that's got high frequencies. Really, those frequencies are the ones that make the sound crisp and clear and detailed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. She goes on to ask, I'm interested in calming the central nervous system for cerebral palsy, decreasing the startle reflex to loud noises, and increasing ability to speak under stress when auditory processing and language don't work well. Is there a good system or sound therapy for that? Any good music entertainment you can recommend or skills?
Well, there's a lot there in terms of sound therapy. When Alex Doman was talking about the green zone in the listening program, that's really working on those lower frequency tones and kind of the rhythmic, slower rhythm. And that is very calming and settling to the nervous system. And that is a good place to start. And then in our sound therapy programs, again, as Alex was kind of talking about, they build up. So you want to get the system settled. When you're operating in fight or flight or in that high alert state, you're not as available for learning. And of course, that's going to happen if things are constantly challenging for you. But so the way the listening programs work is you first work at that grounding organizational level, and then start to work with higher and higher frequencies. And certainly with our students with cerebral palsy, we have, worked with the body level and then really worked with the auditory stimulation and training in order to start to work on the language skills. In fact, the example that I gave in the program of the student who had not been able to pronounce his sounds for even with years of speech therapy actually was a student with cerebral palsy.
Mm-hmm. I remember him. He's probably 27 now or something like that.
Yep.
That's how long it's been.
And all kinds
right?
of
I know, it's amazing. Yeah. But I remember that, like it was like a miracle. And I think you attended an IEP meeting or something, and the speech therapists were like, no, he can't make those sounds. And like he started doing it within 3 weeks or something. So many amazing stories. So Dawn continues to ask, do you have any book recommendations? And I think we put, and we'll put this in the chat, Paul Madaule's book,
Yes.
When Listening Comes Alive. And also I remember off the top of my head, I think the title is Sound Through Water, Karen J. Foli.
Yes.
That's also a really good one. Do you have any others off the top of your head?
I would really encourage you to get Paul Madaule's book, When Listening Comes Alive. He has exercises in the back of that book, including the hand mic that he talked about, but he has vocal exercises that are really simple that are meant to be done at home. So definitely check that out.
Great. And I think we posted links for that in the chat, in the comments. And kind of as we were talking about audio vocal training, Dawn asks, is that why talking to yourself through a task out loud works better to help you process?
I am not sure about that. It's not exactly the same thing, but perhaps you're hearing your voice. It's taking us to a little bit lower level because we usually hear that in our head. But I know I do that myself. When something is really challenging, I end up talking myself through it. And so it's probably a support that we naturally do. In terms of the voice supporting the auditory system, that kind of training is really, when I talked about those overtones in the voice, it's that energy in the voice that we want to build in there, because that begins to really stimulate and energize your auditory system and your brain.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And she asked, how would I find assistance for an adult? So do we work with adults? And kind of piggybacking off the question, does this work in older adults or older children, things like that?
It does. We work with all ages, and it works with all ages. The interesting thing, children, it's like their brain they're just learning all the time. There's neuroplasticity going on all the time. And as you get older, that process is different. It's not like a child's that's just so ripe, for that learning. But the great thing about adults is that they tend to be so much more observant and intentional about what they're trying to do. And so, it works for all ages as long as you're consistent with it. And I think it's really wonderful watching adults go through this process.
Absolutely. And one more question. Have you found that sign language works better as a supplement or kind of as an accommodation while fixing auditory processing?
We have not done a lot of that. However, what you want is for each person to be able to communicate and get their needs met. And if you have a child that is nonverbal and they can begin to do some signing, absolutely. It's like as you're trying to build these underlying skills, it takes time. And of course, there's a gap between where you are and where you ultimately want to be. And it takes a little while to close that gap. And so whatever assistance you can give them or provide them, you want to do that. And so I think signing is a great tool. You want them to be able to get their needs met.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Beck asks, what type of assessment would you recommend to detect auditory challenges?
In our centers, we do what we call a functional assessment. And so we're looking at auditory issues in a lot of different ways. Some of it is, listening questionnaires that parents fill out. And we do various different kinds of tests that are looking at phonemic awareness and language, listening. We do some specific auditory testing in the centers. But in terms of really getting a diagnosis of auditory processing disorder or exploring that possibility, an audiologist is the person who does that. Mm-hmm. And speech therapists may dig into auditory processing, but really an audiologist is going to be the person. And you have to ask, especially if you have a child, not all audiologists specialize in pediatric auditory processing. They, many specialize in hearing and hearing aids. So you just have to check around.
Mm-hmm. And just based off of feedback from parents, it's also not something that's usually part of a standard IEP testing process. So a lot of times parents have to ask specifically for an auditory evaluation. And the school district sometimes will contract with an audiologist to have that done, but it is not part of a standard testing battery that they would do for IEP testing.
Right. And we did actually do an LD Expert show
Mhm.
on with an audiologist, and we'll post that up in the chat so that you can dig into this idea of testing and auditory processing diagnosis a little bit more.
Mhm. And then Deanna has a follow-up question. Can you talk about the relationship between needing to hum often and sensory needs?
So humming is actually stimulating bone conduction. We hear through our ears, through the air, and we also hear through our bones, through our skeletal system. And humming is stimulating that system. And so it is grounding. It kind of helps you know where you are in space. And so that is something that you might see with a child who is, needing to heighten their awareness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We see it a lot in our students when they first come to us, kind of helping to keep them engaged or grounded if they're, thinking through something, or if they're trying to stay alert.
Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of humming, and that behavior tends to go away as they do sound therapy and auditory training. All right. I think I got to everyone. Thank you, parents. Again, auditory processing is a really hot topic. And I think that it's resonating with a lot of parents that are kind of having those light bulb moments of like, oh my gosh, my kid does that. If there are follow-up questions, or you have additional questions after watching this, if you're watching it on the replay and not watching live, you can always join our Mom Squad. That is our private Facebook group where it's a community of parents that have kids with learning and attention challenges. I do post guides, which are sections of resources and research related to a variety of topics. And we do have a guide on auditory processing. So you can access that in our Mom Squad. You just need to go to our Facebook page to find the link. We posted it in the chat, or go to Facebook groups and search the keywords SLC Mom Squad to request to join. And another place that you can get additional information and resources and community is our monthly peace groups. That is our private, or not private, but parent support group. I guess it is private because it is a meeting. So it's a collective group. So we meet once a month. It's parents with kids and teens with learning and attention challenges. And we have discussions on a variety of topics. This month, this Thursday, September 23rd, we are meeting to have an executive function workshop where we're working with parents. I'm taking your real questions, the things that you're dealing with your kids in relation to executive function. And we're going to work through those problems step by step to give you kind of a springboard for working with your child at home and to make real lasting change in the field of executive function. So in order to join that meeting, go to stowellcenter.com/peace to get the registration link. You do need to get that registration link to join the live meeting. It will not be rebroadcast. That is the purpose of those meetings, is to help you in the moment get your questions answered, and to come away with a tool or a strategy. So to be part of that meeting, again, it's Thursday, September 23rd at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to stowellcenter.com/peace. And I look forward to seeing all you parents and working through some of these challenges that you're facing with your kids and kind of getting you off to a good start with the new school year.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, everyone, for participating with us in our Auditory Processing Best of show. This is LD Expert Live, your place for answers and solutions for learning disabilities, dyslexia, and attention challenges. We're live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Next Tuesday, you will get to take a peek inside of Stowell Learning Centers to see what cognitive learning therapies for real change look like. And you'll get to hear from 2 of our students and their moms about dyslexia, executive function, improving test scores, and about their experience at the Learning Center. Be sure to join us next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Stowell Learning Centers are open for both remote and on-site sessions and evaluations. We work with children and adults doing targeted brain training to permanently eliminate struggles associated with dyslexia, auditory processing, and other learning differences so that students can become confident, independent learners. If you would like a free consultation for yourself or your child, give us a call or visit our website at stowellcenter.com. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next week.